It's time once again for a fireside chat with Hamdad. There is no fire. You were tricked. It's in fact the oldest ruse in the Ruse Master's Big Book of Ruses. But stick around anyway. We're going to be talking about a topic near and dear to my heart, as I love to eat delicious food. I assume you do as well. It's an addiction, really. I have to eat at least once a day. I can't seem to quit. There's going to be 10 billion humans on this earth by 2050. Not some far off year like 3000 where we have plenty of time to figure out what to do about it. We have 30 years to figure out how we're going to feed a 3 billion increase in the global population. And it is our problem, because if the people who formerly were able to live by subsistence farming in equatorial regions are no longer able to do that because of climate change, they're all going to show up on our doorstep, coming in on our borders in inflatable rafts, and we won't really be able to turn them away, because that won't be politically viable. We are, at least to some extent, to blame for their predicament. So how do we prevent that? How do we prevent global starvation? How do we prevent the oncoming famine? This has been predicted many times before by Malthusians. They've been wrong over and over. I expect they're wrong about this as well. Every time they predicted a date by which we should have run out of resources or the ability to feed the existing population, we always pulled some kind of magic out of our ass, like Norman Borlaug's revolution of how agriculture was performed. We are the world champions at cheating death, humanity is. And with any luck, we can continue to do that. How I think we're going to cuck the Malthusians this time is by farming the ocean. This is going to sound ridiculous, but it's true. The average person academically understands that the ocean is a three-dimensional volume and that there's land under it. But some part of their brain doesn't normally register that. They think of the ocean as a flat surface that boats move along. They don't consciously register that it's just land underneath a lot of water. But there's land down there, and crucially, it is land that is relatively untouched because of the difficulty until recent decades of accessing it. So it has pre-industrial densities of precious metals that we've not been able to get at until very recently with robots like the ones you're seeing on the screen now. It has tremendous potential for generating energy through tidal turbines like this one, which potentially could be continuous without the need for batteries if we put them in the Gulf Stream. Through OTEC columns, oceanic thermal energy conversion, which exploits the thermal differential between the surface of the ocean and just below the thermocline, basically turning the surface of the sea into a gigantic solar thermal power plant, as seen here. There's wave generators. I'm not too keen on wave generators because they're in a very challenging environment with a lot of salt water. They're at the air-water interface where there's plenty of air available for oxidation. So I expect those to rust and fail quickly. But there are other more suitable means of extracting energy from the ocean, and we've only just begun doing that. But really what this video is about is food. The third major resource behind minerals and energy is food. That's the big trillion-dollar market that is as yet relatively untapped. Until now, we have been living off of the sea in much the same way our ancestors used to live off of the land many thousands of years ago, before agriculture, when we were just hunter-gatherers. We just going around taking what we needed because the land was just so abundant that there wasn't any need for agriculture until competing tribes really got their shit together and got organized about hunting and diminished the population of wild buffalo and gazelle and deer and all the things we like to hunt. And then we had to start settling down and figuring out how we were going to feed ourselves, and agriculture was born. We have not yet made that jump, at least completely. I suppose it's more accurate to say we've only just begun to make that transition finally at this late stage of the game, having developed so far on land, we're so far behind in the ocean. We're just now starting to farm the ocean with enclosures like this one. Like this one. Both of these are real, by the way. These are not renders. Here's some more pictures of Ocean Farm. And even larger, more ambitious enclosures, like the successor to Ocean Farm seen here. That is a render. That has not been built yet. Ocean Farm 1, however, is very real and is in the water, which is really the exciting thing about being an ocean nerd. You don't have to wait decades for cool shit to happen like you do if you're a space nerd, because everything we do in the ocean, for the most part, yields an immediate or very near-term profit. Shit gets done, and it happens quickly because the profit motive can really go to work, whereas in space, anything we do with humans is done under the assumption that there will be a return on it centuries from now. So understandably, although that's the future of our species, progress is much slower. Not in the ocean. Shit's happening fast because everybody else who has a lot of money and who is already involved in the industries of feeding human beings and supplying metals to industry and generating energy for our consumption already understands what I'm telling you, which is that there's 2/3 of the earth that is perfectly good land, overflowing with resources that we've barely touched, because all this time up until now we've just used the ocean as a place to hunt, as a place to trawl, dragging destructive nets across the seafloor, as a place to dump our waste. We've been using it as a toilet and as a garbage dump, not realizing its incredible potential. We've made it to where we are now, using almost exclusively the resources available on the 1/3 of the earth that is above water. And we've gotten to 7 billion humans that way. So people saying we're facing imminent doom, basing their calculations purely on the resources available on the land, are ignoring the elephant in the room. There's 2/3 of the earth. There's twice as much as we have used to get to the point where we are now, almost completely untouched, except for oil and except for fishing rapaciously and destructively wild edible fish stocks, which we have to stop doing. We have to clean up the ocean. We have to undo the damage we've done to the ocean, not for feel-good, woo-woo spiritual reasons, but because we need that. We need that to live. We have been dumping toxic waste in it. Gina Reinhardt in Australia, she's a coal tycoon, has been dumping coal waste directly into the Great Barrier Reef, just without any regard for the future utility that the ocean represents, that we're going to absolutely require in order to make it any further than we have now. If we take good care of it, if we put new technologies like ocean cleaning robots to work, removing plastic particulate from the ocean, removing carbonic acid from the ocean, which is what CO2 turns into. If there's an excess of it in the atmosphere touching the surface of seawater, it turns into carbonic acid. We have to reduce that. That's killing coral reefs, which is an important habitat for fish that we like to eat. This is a practical environmentalism, not motivated by your feelings, but by the hard, cold truth that we're going to be facing brutal conditions. We're going to be facing global famine if we don't start getting our shit together, putting hardware in the water, and getting ocean farming up and running quickly, like we have on land, like we did on land thousands and thousands of years ago. We've really been dragging our feet. We've been resting our laurels. But if we get into the ocean, if we clean it up, if we undo the damage we've already done, which is probably going to be funded by taxation on oceanic industry, which is going to explode in the coming decades. It already is. We've got ocean farming already beginning. We've got ocean mining just starting out. The hardware is real. The hardware is being deployed as we speak. If we get all that shit up and running and expand quickly enough, if we scale up our ocean farms to just the small operations that are currently in trials today to the industrial scale farming that already exists on land, we have a chance not just of surviving, but of preserving and even improving our quality of life into the future, like we've always hoped would be possible in optimistic science fiction. There's so many pessimists and naysayers who, just based on their disgust with how we've treated the environment, confidently predict, and I suspect even kind of hope, that we run into disaster. It doesn't have to be that way, though. If we treat the ocean right, if we clean it up and repair the damage and get serious about ocean farming, then we have a good chance of having a much brighter future where everybody has enough to eat. You might have to adjust your diet. You might have to convince Americans to eat the fish burger instead of the beef burger, but that's not a big deal. I would rather eat the fish burger than the bug burger. I'd rather eat the plant burger than the bug burger. I think you could sell a lot of people on seafood, especially as economies of scale bring the price down. This is incidentally one of the few applications that exists for underwater habitats where it actually makes business sense to have a habitat on the seabed with saturation diving capability. You only ever really need an underwater habitat. It pains me to say this because it's such cool technology and I want to see more of it. But in the process of investigating what all is out there in the way of industries that actually could benefit and increase their profits by the use of putting humans underwater doing saturation diving, or just underwater in some kind of stationary structure, I have found only two applications, besides, of course, science and recreation, like resorts, underwater hotels, underwater restaurants, which are already numerous in Fiji and the Maldives. That's mining, which the Chinese are going to do with a stationary submarine. They're going to strip away all the propulsion except for thrusters that it will use to stay in one spot, and then they'll tow it around from site to site, and then they'll have humans in there about 200 feet deep, so they don't have to worry about the brutal storms in the North China Sea that would otherwise destroy mining support vessels loitering on the surface. And the humans in the sub, the neutered sub, basically operate robots on the ends of fiber optic tethers miles below, robots of the sort that I've already shown you. And that's how they plan to do the mining. And then they'll have a ship that comes by during clear weather that they suction up all of the collected metallic particulate into, and then they take that to shore. The other application is farming. Farming, it satisfies the very narrow criteria that you need to satisfy in order to justify the use of underwater saturation diving habitat specifically, which is you need an application where you need divers frequently diving, doing a lot of diving every day, because that's the real utility of saturation diving habitats. It maximizes the amount of time they can spend in the water because they don't have to waste most of the dive decompressing before they surface, because they can return between dives to a environment that is at pressure, that the pressure they're already adapted to. The application needs to be in a fixed location where you don't want, say, a submarine or something instead. And you need to be doing something or other that generates a lot of money in that fixed location over a long period of time to justify the outlay on that infrastructure. And that it ticks all the boxes. All the boxes are checked here. I think if we see commercial application of underwater habitats, it's going to be in the field of mariculture. And mariculture, you may have heard the word aquaculture. That's for when it's done on land, when they raise fish in giant concrete vats. When you do it at sea, in the open ocean, it's called mariculture. And there have been critical voices saying mariculture is not sustainable. That was true in the past, when we used to feed the fish we were raising meal made from other fish that we didn't want to eat. And that just kicked the can down the road. That just offloaded the problem of overfishing to different set of species of fish that we made the fish food out of. That's not the case anymore. Most of the mariculture operations going today are semi-closed loop, where they preferentially raise fish who are either herbivores or who can be adapted to an herbivorous diet on meal made from seaweed, which they grow underneath the enclosures because the seaweed is fertilized by the falling poop from the fish. So it seems like a closed loop, but because it's in the ocean, some of that material gets carried away by currents. That's why semi-closed loop. If you do it this way, it is sustainable. It is environmentally responsible. You're basically building a very large aquaponics setup, but without all the pipes. You're just doing it in the water and using the water as the ambient medium for both the cultivation of the fish, the carrying their waste down to where the plants are, and then harvesting the plants manually to feed to the fish. It is an aquaponics system just on a very large scale. And as you have seen from the pictures I've shown you, it is possible to scale this way, way up. And it gets cheaper as you scale it up. So we're going to see some truly huge, enormous farming structures at sea with habitats built into them, on the surface anyway, for the farmers of tomorrow. And perhaps the right answer for how to integrate saturation diving habitats into this whole operation so that they're not dependent upon depth, so you can farm at any depth, at any location in the sea, is that you build the saturation habitat onto the underside of that structure with an elevator linking them and something like an airlock so you can adapt to the pressure when going between the two. And then you have this structure hanging off the underside that aquanauts can live in for weeks at a time, cycling, trading off with the next team after them, going out and using electric underwater scooters or pulley lines or something to cover the distance they need to cover. This will enable a really small number of divers to do a lot more work, to cover huge areas, to supervise, to harvest the fish, to inspect the structures, the parts of the majority of them which is below the waterline, to identify maintenance needs, to carry out maintenance, to effect repairs, using a skill set in underwater welding that has already been cultivated by the existing subsea industry, divers who work on oil rigs. It'll be really just a continuation of that. It'll be more of the same for the divers themselves. It will be very intuitive, very comprehensible work, and it will be an explosion in the number of jobs for people with that skill set. So I anticipate just a very rapid increase in what I call oceanic resource development. And remember that term, oceanic resource development. That is going to be a household word in the coming decades as our future, at least our near future, turns out to be more Sequest than Star Trek. And that's all for this time.